Hi, I'm Neil Hermes and welcome to my weekly bird wrap. And this week I've got three stories for you. One is about Caspian Tern migration. The second one is about aggression in birds. And the third one is about a fascinating new species or family of birds that's been discovered in fossil beds in New Zealand. Hi, I'm Neil Hermes and welcome to my weekly bird wrap. And my first story is about Caspian Terns and migration. Now I'm fascinated by migration. Migration is one of these things that just puzzles us and amazes us all the time. Caspian Terns are a large coastal bird, like a large gull, that feeds on fish, and they nest on the sandbanks in places like in North America and in Europe. There's a particular group of Caspian, they're found all around the world, and they're found in Australia as well. There was a group of Caspian terns nesting in Sweden that was studied by a university group there. And they were looking at the migration of the Caspian terns from Sweden, from the Baltic Sea, down to Africa, thousands of kilometres every year. These birds migrate in small family groups and small flocks. And what they were able to do is track birds to Africa and back. And what they've discovered is, in the Caspian tern at least, the male parent escorts the young of a year to Africa. So the birds stick with their dad, not the female. We don't know why it's not the female, but they stick with the father, and they travel with the father from the Baltic to Africa. Now, the return trip is done without the parent. So the bird has learnt where to travel in that first journey and travels back solo. But for birds that didn't have a father or got separated from their father on the trip, they died. They couldn't find the location, and they perished. So it's an interesting new insight into how birds learn to migrate. And at least in the Caspian tern, it's learning the route from an adult. And this is an intergenerational thing that's happening then, is that it's a cultural thing where one generation is teaching the next generation how to go. It's not innate. It doesn't come just from the sort of genetic background. You actually have to learn the route. But you only have to learn it once, and once it's locked in, you can then find your own way back in the reverse order of all of those locations. Now, we know that, of course, migratory birds have other methods with astronomic reference points and magnetic alignment, etc. But it is critical that they have that first migration with a parent bird, and there's the case of Caspian terns, the male. A couple of times, apparently, foster parents also did the escorting, so it wasn't necessarily the biological father. Fascinating bit of research out of Sweden on Caspian terns. The second story this week is about aggression in birds. I read this little article about a person who looked at some bird feeder birds, siskins. They were in Europe. And they observed that, when these particular birds are feeding out in the trees, there's not much aggression. The food's spread out in the trees, and the birds are finding the food separately. But when you put a feeder out and you have a concentration of food, and the birds are coming to a particular place, that then generates a whole lot of aggression between them. And this would occur wherever you get a concentration of food, not just at bird feeders. Birds that would otherwise be non-aggressive to one another, when food gets short, become very aggressive in those particular locations. I don't suppose it's an unusual idea, but what it does mean is that we should be conscious, particularly people who feed birds, to make sure that there are opportunities for birds to get access to the food in a number of locations, so that it's not increasing the amount of aggression that's having to occur by birds trying to keep other birds away from the food. Aggression is sort of not only between species, so between two cockatoos, but also between species. So some species, like rainbow lorikeets, are more aggressive at bird feeders than say birds like galahs. So interesting little story about aggression and a discussion about aggression and how it's different in the wild to these concentrated places. My last story is about fossil birds. Now, a lot of people are really interested in fossils. They love it. The whole dinosaur thing gets us going as kids. And in the ornithological world, we are still discovering new species, and not only just new species, but whole new groups of birds that we didn't know existed. Imagine if I told you that we'd discovered flamingos and we had no flamingos ever before, Well, that's what's just recently happened in New Zealand. They've just found a group of birds that are just not related to anything else. And this is obviously a lineage of birds that for whatever reason didn't make it, they didn't continue on, and other species, other groups of birds have taken over. They've named this particular bird Zealand Ornis relictus, which essentially means New Zealand bird relic. And it's something like a mouse bird, something like a New Zealand wren. We're not quite sure what it is, but it's in effect a whole new family of birds that was we assume was widespread in New Zealand at some point, and was a whole family of birds that then became extinct as other birds and other bird groups then took over. They also found in the same research an owlet nightjar. Now in Australia and New Guinea we have lots of species of owlet nightjars. In New Zealand they used to have a nightjar, a giant owlet nightjar, which became extinct when the Polynesians arrived in New Zealand, and they have no owlet nightjars left, but they are now finding fossil nightjars in the New Zealand fossil beds as well. So it's just showing that the avifauna has changed over the millennia in places like New Zealand with these new species being discovered. You can see more information about these fossils on the website. So thanks for listening to the wrap this week. If you want to see more, check out the YouTube channel, check out the website, check out my tours, and happy birding.